First Legion, the Dark Angels. Primarch Lionel Johnson. Their allegiance, loyal to the Imperium. Their homeworld was formerly the death world Caliban. Now, they dwell within the Rock, the last fragment of Caliban that serves as the base of their fleet chapter. Their current chapter master is Azrael, the Supreme Grand Master. Their specialization is in extermination, and their battle cry is, "Repent, for tomorrow you die," or "For the Lion." The Dark Angels are the first legion of the Adeptus Astartes, forged from the gene seed of Lionel Johnson, the first Primarch. As the first legion and the first Primarch, Lion and his Dark Angels acted as the prototype, the standard by which all other Primarchs and legions would later be designed. There was a great deal of meticulous planning and preparation when creating the First Legion, and they would be the first legion to see battle at the end of the Unification Wars on Terra. Earning the nickname the Uncrowned Princes, the First Legion carried with it an inefficiency, lethality, and arrogance that would stay with them throughout their history, both for good and for ill. The First Legion, like all Astartes, were without their Primarch for most of their early history, and as a result, were required to self-govern and organize. They formed a series of hosts of command, using up to 18 different hosts at one point. The different hosts were designed primarily to field test and employ various different necessary approaches to combat. In this way, the Uncrowned Princes were the first establishers of the Principia Bellicosa for all Astartes' battle doctrine and tactics. However, as other legions were established and began adopting and mastering these different tactics themselves, many of the hosts of the princes would become obsolete and unnecessary and were therefore faded out. By the time of the Horus Heresy, only 6 hosts would remain. It was perhaps better this way as well, as the First Legion would be needed for their most vital task, as the Emperor's exterminators. The Emperor knew better than anyone that there were threats to humanity in the galaxy so horrific and so terrible that it wasn't enough to simply kill them. No record of them could exist. These threats had to be erased, exterminated, blotted out so no memory of them remained. And for this reason, the First Legion was tasked with being the exterminators of the Imperium's monsters, engaging in wars and battles against foes the Imperium had never heard of and would never learn of later, given exclusive access by the Emperor to weapons of unspeakable mass destruction to fulfill this duty. Some of these weapons included vortex weaponry, weapons that could destroy a foe on the molecular level, and even planet-busting technology. The First Legion would go to wars, win battles, and return without any pomp, celebration, or record of their deeds, and not even gravestones left to mark that their foes ever lived. This led to the new name for their legion, the Angels of Death. During the Great Crusade, while other legions fought open campaigns under the eye and admiration of the Imperium, the Angels of Death became very solitary and distant, choosing to stay secretive and self-enclosed. They had developed an internal culture of arrogance and superiority, although this wasn't entirely without merit. Though other legions and Imperium citizens might see the Angels of Death as a lesser legion for their fewer battle honors and victories, this is largely due to their willingness to battle threats that would later be classified and sealed by the Emperor. As said earlier, the Angels of Death cared little for flair or ceremony, but instead they sought out the nightmares of the galaxy and eliminated them. However, as time went on, the First Legion began to develop a massive sense of superiority and egotistical self-centeredness, believing themselves not only to be the best legion, but also completely unbeatable or corruptible. And this new egotism would sow the seeds for the legion's humbling, and it would also mark the start of the legion's most devastating flaw, which would carry with them for the rest of their history. As the Primarchs began to emerge and be reunited with their respective legions, the First Legion, who were still without their Primarch, felt all the more encouraged to prove themselves as the best, which would lead to several reckless and audacious actions and tactics, leading to incredible losses and devastating defeats that might have been avoided otherwise. Further, the Legion began to believe, in their arrogance, that they had nothing left to learn or innovate, and thus they began steeping deeper into tradition and ceremony rather than into new and innovative practices. Individual hosts closely guarded their methods, tactics, and secrets, leading to internal rivalries and distrust within the Legion itself. And when the Legion suffered their most significant loss on a Xenos planet called Canis Baylor, it was clear that the First Legion was no longer the greatest, and had fallen behind such legions as the Ultramarines and the Space Wolves. This would only be exacerbated later during the incursion known as the Rangda Xenocides, when the First Legion led another audacious and reckless attack which, while successful, saw them suffer significant losses, including the death of their current Grand Master. Rather than honor their sacrifices and losses, Robute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, chastised and criticized the First Legion for their reckless arrogance and, frankly, stupid tactics. This shame would stand with the First Legion for some time to come, but they would not learn from their errors, sadly. The rulership of the Legion fell to the individual masters of the different hosts, who took their chapters to different corners of the galaxy to wage their own wars for redemption. In so doing, they fought viciously to reclaim their lost honors, but with little regard for their own lives or numbers, leading to many victories, yes, but all at terrible costs. They had truly become angels of death, obsessed with both delivering death to the enemy and willingly accepting death for their own need to regain honor. By this point, the First Legion, once the first and finest of the Astartes Legion, once known as the uncrowned princes, were now a shadow of their former glory. That is, until Caliban. The first Primarch had been absconded away like all of his brothers. The infant father of the First Legion would be deposited on the death world known as Caliban, a world shrouded in a dense and deadly forest filled with savage and hungry flora and fauna. Everything on Caliban is a dangerous and potentially hostile life form, and surviving on it is a challenge the local humans had struggled with all their existence. The child Primarch lived on his own in those forests for 10 years, fighting and hiding to survive, learning to outsmart, outfight, and outlive every other creature in the forest. When he was discovered by the Knights of the Order on Caliban, their commander Luther named him Lion L. Johnson, which means Lion, Son of the Forest. Over the course of his youth and early adulthood, Lion would learn quickly how to speak, write, fight, and command. He quickly became the Grand Master of the Order, and his adoptive father Luther became as close as a brother to him. Under Lion's leadership, the Order began a worldwide purge and hunt of all the beasts and monsters of Caliban, eventually slaying every last one, creating what Lion hoped to be an eternal prosperity for his forest world. In fact, he even began pondering if perhaps this prosperity might be spread beyond this world into others. As this thought played in his head, that was when Caliban was discovered by the Imperium of Man, and the Emperor would reunite with his firstborn son. Lion's reunion with his legion was not an easy or smooth affair. While none of the First Legion could deny he was indeed their gene-sire, the Legion's sense of pride and arrogance made them unwilling to simply give in to the whim of their new Primarch. To assert his dominance and break the pride of his legion, Lion sought out every rogue or wandering company and challenged their commanders to single combat. Despite the commanders having access to Terminator-class armor, Lion bested every one of them, earning their respect and devotion. In this way, Lionel Johnson was one of the few Primarchs who not only took on leadership of his sons, but earned it in their eyes through his actions towards and against them. Drawing from Calibanite lore, he renamed the First Legion the Dark Angels, and began the process of restructuring and integrating new doctrine, hierarchy systems, and traditions within the Legion to reflect ones he was familiar with on Caliban. He also worked to integrate some of his fellow Knights of Caliban into the Dark Angels, including his brother figure Luther, who became his second in command. With his new Legion, the Dark Angels would prove their merit when they rushed to the aid of the Ultramarines on Carcassonne. The citizens had rose up in rebellion, and the Ultramarines were being overwhelmed. The Dark Angels were decisive and destructive, decimating the insurgents and saving the Ultramarines from being overrun. But the Legion's return to power would be met with another invasion from the Rangda. But this time, Lion led his Legion to war against this Xeno threat, and he proved himself a competent and terrifying foe. However, even with the Lion's aid, the Legion would suffer catastrophic losses, which they would never recover from. These losses would cause the Dark Angels to fall in strength considerably, thus making way for other legions to claim the mantle of strongest, such as the Ultramarines, whose raw numbers overshadowed almost every other legion. This did not stop the Dark Angels and Lionel Johnson from gaining fame and recognition at last. Many battles were waged during the Great Crusade that saw the Lion and his Legion rise above near impossible odds and claim outstanding victories. The Emperor himself would claim that no other Primarch could claim to have conquered more worlds than Lion. Even Horus himself was envious. But where there is success, there will be those unwilling to accept it. Lion's elevation in strength, status, and fame was not celebrated by all. A few of his own Primarch brothers were distrusting of Lion and fearful of him, and there was even an incident where Leman Russ and Lionel Johnson engaged in a furious brawl over Lion beating him to the kill of a planetary governor who had insulted Russ's honor, an event still remembered by the Dark Angels and Space Wolves today. But more than any of his Primarch siblings, none felt more frustrated than Luther. Luther, who had been like a brother to the Lion during his childhood on Caliban, watched as this boy he'd saved in the forest grew into one of the most famed men in the galaxy, while he was relegated to a mere second in command. So, when the planet Sarash plotted an assassination attempt of Lion by slipping a warhead onto his flagship, Luther learned of it and hesitated to stop it, deliberating if he should simply let Lion die. In the end, he warned Lion and made moves to stop the assassination attempt. But Lion had sensed his hesitation, and for the first time, Lion felt a distrust for his close friend and brother. But rather than kill or question Luther, he decided to send Luther, as well as half of the Dark Angels, back to Caliban to oversee the training of new recruits, as well as to see to the needs of the people there. None are entirely sure why Lion did this. Some believe it was his arrogance, others believe it was a simple lapse in judgment towards Luther. But in truth, Lion believed that those who waver or falter in the face of duty must be set aside, and those who rise to the challenge must be allowed to attain glory. If Luther and his ilk were not prepared to rise to meet the challenges of the Great Crusade, they should not be allowed to join in it. A decision Lion would come to regret dearly, as this action led to an intense bitterness and animosity, not only from Luther, but several other Dark Angels exiled to Caliban with him. While Luther and his exiled compatriots seethed in jealous silence, the Lion and the Dark Angels continued their campaigns in the Great Crusade, preferring to do as they always had: hunt the horrors of the galaxy. They forewent larger and more grand campaigns, such as the Ulanor campaign, in favor of seeking out the wretched horrors and monsters of the cosmos that threaten humanity and erasing their very existence from history. When Lion's Primarch brother and War Master of the Imperial Armies Horus Lupercal declared his treachery and intent to dethrone and kill the Emperor, the beginning of the most devastating war in human history had begun. However, Horus knew that his revolt would depend on several factors, not least of which how he handled the Dark Angels and Lionel Johnson. Horus knew that his older brother was an apex predator among the Primarchs, and the idea of him and his legion arriving on Terra to stop him was a risk he couldn't afford. Fortunately, the Dark Angels were far from Terra at the time, and he had to ensure it stayed that way. He ordered Conrad Kurz and the Night Lord's Legion to slow the Lion down as much as they could and stop their return to Terra in what became known as the Thramas Crusade. But this ultimately failed, as the Dark Angels proved too powerful for the Night Lords. Lion, frustrated and desperate to get to Terra, ordered his fleet to head straight for the Throne World. However, their way was blocked by the Great Ruin Storm, a massive warp storm created by Lorgar and Erebus to isolate and block the Dark Angels, the Blood Angels, and the Ultramarines from reinforcing the Loyalists. The Dark Angels, therefore, were forced to fight against demons and warp horrors, even going so far as breaking the Council of Nicaea and using their psychers as a means of defending themselves. In the end, the Dark Angels had to escape the storm, but they were not idle. With their forces split, with one detached going to aid the Space Wolves in their battle with the Alpha Legion, another being sent to pursue Typhus of the Death Guard, and Lion and his main force of Dark Angels decided to rendezvous on Macragge along with the Ultramarines and Blood Angels and their Primarchs to form Imperium Secundus, an emergency proposition by Sanguinius and Guilliman, so that even that the Imperium must have truly fallen, humanity would have a new government and power to rally to. Lion, understandably, was uncomfortable with the arrangement, but he couldn't truly argue the case. Besides, he had larger problems to deal with, namely hunting Conrad Kurz, who had stowed away on his flagship and was now wreaking havoc on Macragge. But Imperium Secundus caused more strife than it did create unity. Lion and Guilliman clashed frequently in terms of intent and desire, and Sanguinius had been unable to truly encourage peaceful cooperation between the two. In the end, what truly brought an end to Imperium Secundus was Sanguinius having a vision of the Emperor still alive beyond the ruined storm. Immediately, the three Primarchs and their legions decided to breach the ruined storm regardless of the risk and reach Terra. But they were only partly successful. Horus, having foreseen that this may happen, set up various blockades to prevent the three legions from arriving to Terra on time. And to that end, the three chose to split up their forces and work on different ends. Sanguinius and his Blood Angels would punch straight through to Terra. The Dark Angels and the Ultramarines would draw the attention of the blockade and give the Blood Angels their opening to do so. After helping his brother Sanguinius break through to Terra, Lion decided to go do what he could to relieve Terra's defenders by drawing away the Chaos forces. Rather than go straight to Terra, he and the Dark Angels did what they did best: exterminate the enemies of man. They launched attacks upon the homeworld of the traitor legions and destroyed them, including the homeworlds of the Death Guard, the World Eaters, and the Emperor's children, as well as many other worlds loyal to Horus. This crusade of vengeance not only saw Lion reunite with his brothers Leman Russ and Corvus Corax, but also deprived Horus of critical resources he needed to wage his invasion. These losses forced Horus to escalate his invasion plans before he was truly ready. While the fleet of Dark Angels led by Lord Commander Corswain had managed to reach Terra, and, knowing of the desperate situation the Imperium found itself in, fought to retake the Astronomicon so it might guide Guilliman's fleets to Terra. In the end, they were successful, and through their efforts, Guilliman was able to journey to Terra to save the planet. With the Astronomicon restored, Imperial reinforcements, including the likes of Guilliman, Leman Russ, and Lionel Johnson himself, were now en route to Terra. Horus was out of time. His final gamble was to force a direct duel with the Emperor. In the end, not only was Sanguinius slain, but the Emperor was mortally wounded in the duel, despite having succeeded in killing Horus. The heresy was finally at an end, but at a tremendous cost, and the Dark Angels as a whole would reel at the end of it. But for the Angels of Death, their shame had only just begun. For back on Caliban, a darkness had been festering, born from jealousy and resentment, and the Dark Angels would never be the same when they uncovered it. After taking time to help restore order to Terra, Lionel Johnson determined it was time to return to Caliban, take time to restore his legion's strength, and take stock of losses and damages, and perhaps maybe even get some much-needed rest. However, the Dark Angels' return to Caliban was not met with joy or elation, but with orbital defense weapons fire. The Dark Angels on Caliban had fired on their brothers and their father. You see, while Lion and his angels had been away, Luther had been stewing with mad jealousy and hatred, and he was not alone. Many of the Dark Angels on the planet with him had felt left out and ignored in the Imperium's most critical hour. Some were convinced that Lion had betrayed them. Others believed Lion might have turned against the Imperium and was one of the traitors himself. Some had no idea what to think of their imposed isolation. And thanks to the secretive nature of the Dark Angels and Lion, most of his sons below had no idea how to feel about their returning father and brothers. But Luther had made other arrangements. The Chaos Gods, furious at the defeat of Horus, and also knowing the threat Lionel Johnson posed, lent their aid to Luther, empowering him and giving him guidance and encouragement, and Luther accepted it, ordering the Dark Angels to fire on Lion's ship. Lionel Johnson, furious and outraged at the betrayal and believing his homeworld to have fallen to the very madness he had worked so hard to stamp out, ordered an immediate counterattack, bombarding the world from orbit and then launching a ground assault. Brother Dark Angel slaughtered Brother Dark Angel, and it would be Lion himself who finally dueled his beloved father and brother Luther. Lion ordinarily would have been more than a match for Luther, but with the aid of the Dark Gods, Luther proved a true threat to the war-weary and furious Lionel Johnson. After landing a mortal blow, Luther was given the chance to kill his beloved brother. But in the moment of triumph, some of his former honor returned, and Luther hesitated, realizing his failure and his sin. He could not kill Lion. And the Dark Gods roared in fury. In their anger and desperation, they created a warp storm. This, combined with the planetary bombardment Lion had ordered before, shattered the planet, reducing it to nothing more than an asteroid field. The majority of the fallen Dark Angels, as they came to be called, who had turned on the Lion, were swept into the warp storm, cast adrift through time and space, to be regurgitated out in the future at different places and times. The loyal angels, however, did all they could to clean up the damage, what little they could. Because Caliban was such a remote world, and none but the Dark Angels knew about Lion's isolation of his forces, no one in the Imperium knew the truth about what happened on Caliban, and the Dark Angels knew it had to stay that way. The betrayal on their homeworld had been the greatest shame they could possibly face. Not only was it humiliating to have their homeworld destroyed, fighting each other rather than another great foe, but it was clear and undeniable proof that the First Legion was not incorruptible. They were flawed, they were fractured, and they were just as susceptible to the machinations of the enemy as any of their cousins. The pride of the First Legion would not stand for it, and thus this had to be kept a secret, no matter the cost. Caliban was gone. The only sign of its existence was an asteroid field floating in the place it had once been. The largest chunk of the planet that remained, thanks to its impressive void shields, was a massive mountain monastery known as the Tower of Angels. This mountain was hollowed out and rebuilt into a great monastery ship, which now acts as the Dark Angels' base of operations and home, known as the Rock. The Dark Angels' leadership told no one of the fall of their homeworld, and indeed, as generations of new Dark Angels have been recruited and inducted into the Legion, many of the old guard have refused to even make their new brothers privy to the truth, for the Dark Angels have adopted a paranoia so deep, they do not even fully trust their own brothers. When Gilliman's Codex Astartes was implemented, and the Legions were broken into various chapters of Space Marines, the Dark Angels did not resist the change, but even their successor chapters are not all aware of the truth of their history. Only the chapter masters and their highest ranked officials can be allowed to know. Within the Dark Angels chapter themselves, only the inner circle, the most secretive and respected group of officers within the chapter, as well as the first company known as the Death Wing, know of the history of Caliban and the Fallen. But even among these, only the chapter master knows the other great secrets buried within the rock, such as Luther, who is still alive, imprisoned in a stasis chamber deep in the rock where he mumbles madly and prophesies the return of Lionel Johnson and begs for his brother's forgiveness. And Lionel Johnson himself sleeps within the rock, awaiting the day he will awaken and lead his sons on a great crusade, greater than any other. But in the meantime, the Dark Angels and their successor chapters, referred to collectively as the Unforgiven, all share a common and dark goal. Their traitorous brothers still live. The Fallen, as they are called, have been deposited throughout the galaxy in different places and at different times. Their existence is a reminder of their shame, and it is their solemn duty to hunt, capture, interrogate, and force every single one of the Fallen to repent and die for their sins. This is the greatest and most important task and mission of the Dark Angels, and one they have carried out ruefully and fiercely for 10,000 years. In the current setting, the Great Rift, caused by the 13th Black Crusade, has split the galaxy in half. One side of the Imperium, Imperium Sanctus, is now governed and protected by Guilliman and the forces available on his side of the rift. But the dark side, Imperium Nihilus, has been largely left to fend for itself. That is, until Lionel Johnson himself finally awoke, appearing in Imperium Nihilus across various worlds and recruiting them into his new protectorate. It is clear Lion is shocked and disgusted by the current state of the Imperium, and has no patience for the ecclesiarchy, and obviously has no intention on ruling or taking command. Lion's way has always been the way of the Protector, and so to that end, he will protect as many loyal worlds as he can. To do this, he has begun recruiting fallen Dark Angels who did not intend to betray the Imperium, or were just as deceived as he was, offering them the chance of redemption, as well as redeeming himself for his own part to play in the fall of Caliban. He has amassed a small army of his fallen sons, whom he now calls the Risen, and with their help, as well as his loyal human militia, the Lion Guard, have been waging wars across Nihilus to bring salvation and protection to the needy citizens. However, Lion would reunite with his modern sons during the Arcs of Omen campaign, when Vastor the Archiphane, greater demon of technology and innovation, joined forces with Abaddon and elements of chaos demons, and the World Eaters, of course, to invade the Rock and steal an ancient piece of archaeotech known as the T'Challa Engine. During the battle, the Dark Angels and their ally Blood Angel forces were managing to hold the line until the arrival of the Demon Prince, Angron, who had turned the tide of battle significantly. Just as it seemed Angron would destroy what was left of the Rock and the Angels, from seemingly out of nowhere, emerging from a spectral forest came Lionel Johnson and his risen allies to aid the Dark Angels. After an intense duel, Lion managed to defeat his fallen Primarch brother and at last meet his modern-day Gene sons. To the surprise and relief of the Unforgiven, Lion did not chastise or shame his modern sons. Indeed, he didn't even encourage them to cease their hunt for the fallen. When Azrael, the Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels, approached and offered control of the angels to the Lion, Lion refused, saying he had no desire for it and would only take it when Azrael proved he was no longer worthy of it. Overall, Lion does not take any true commanding role of the angels now, only appearing and guiding when necessary, and when needing to speak with Azrael in the inner circle directly. Otherwise, Lion keeps to himself, still a predator of many secrets. His attitude towards the fallen is also quite mysterious, appearing sometimes in interrogation chambers to speak with members of the fallen Dark Angels. Sometimes the conversations end with him disappearing from the chamber along with the fallen to places known only to him and Azrael. Other times, he'll simply emerge and allow the interrogator chaplains to get on with their work. Currently, the Dark Angels' methods and goals have not changed. They are still the First Legion and the Sons of the Lion. They still fight to destroy the monsters that seek to destroy mankind, and they are stubbornly loyal, tenacious, and powerful. They still hunt the fallen, though perhaps not with the same paranoid zeal as before Lion's return. The Dark Angels still roam the stars, the bulwark against terror, chaos, and damnation. All who oppose them must repent, for tomorrow they will die. The Dark Angels are the exterminators and slayers of monsters. As such, they have versatile weapons, and the warriors themselves are quite adaptable. Masterful tacticians and strategists, taking advantage of any weapon and opportunity. The Legion in its prime carried some of the most powerful weapons of humanity, with some of their hidden technology not known even to the Mechanicum of Mars. Because the Angels were largely molded and formulated by their own history, no other Legion or chapter can quite compare to who they are and how they function. The Dark Angels often will combine elements of different companies and specialities to suit a certain engagement, and every officer must be fully adept at and understanding on how to properly deploy and use the warriors under his command. The Dark Angels are not structured like most other legions. There are various levels of hierarchy and authority within the Legion that are an anathema to their cousins, but they were created for the purpose of internal control and paranoia. As a Dark Angel rises in rank and status, he will not only gain a higher place in the chapter with new responsibilities and expectations, but will be trusted with more knowledge on the Dark Angel's history. And as said before, only the Dark Angels at the very highest level, known as the Inner Circle, are allowed to know the actual history of Caliban and the Fallen. Among the Inner Circle are the chapter masters of the Dark Angel successor chapters, collectively known as the Unforgiven. This circle has sworn itself to hunt down and capture every single member of the Fallen and make them repent. Currently, the leader of the Dark Angels is Supreme Grandmaster Azrael. Azrael is the current Supreme Grandmaster and therefore privy to every single secret of their already very secretive chapter. He knows things even the rest of the Inner Circle does not, and therefore is known as the Keeper of the Truth. He wields the Sword of Secrets and dons the Lion's Helm, a helmet claimed to have been worn by Lionel Johnson himself. When Azrael attempted to return this helm to Lion, Lion refused it, saying he would only take it from Azrael when he was no longer worthy of it. And this seems to indicate that whatever others may think of him, Azrael has earned the Lion's approval. The highest officers within the Dark Angels formulate the Inner Circle. To be a member of the Inner Circle is to be privy to the truth and nature of the Fallen and the true reason for Caliban's destruction. Every member of the Inner Circle is sworn to secrecy, even from their own brothers. To become a member of the Circle, one must serve time with the first company, known as the Death Wing. Therein, they begin to learn the true nature of the Fallen and the Dark Angels, and, should they overcome the trials within the first company, they will be permitted into the Inner Circle's fold. Interestingly enough, while most interrogator chaplains of the Reclusium, some apothecaries and librarians have entered the Inner Circle, no Tech Marine has ever been allowed to join, largely because their loyalty to the Mechanicum will always put them under suspicion. Of the companies within the Dark Angel, the two most prominent are the Death Wing and the Raven Wing, the first and second companies. The Death Wing is the most elite of the Dark Angels, and to be considered for the Death Wing, you must first be approved by the Grand Masters of the Librarians to see if you are worthy. The current captain of the Death Wing is Captain Belial, and they are among the most tenacious and ferocious of the Dark Angels, all wearing pale Terminator armor as a mark of their station. Their primary goal is to capture the Fallen. The Raven Wing, meanwhile, are the second company. Mobile and fast, the Raven Wing favor mobility and swift strikes to heavy firepower. Riding on speeders, aircraft, and bikes, the Raven Wing rush into battle swiftly and harass the enemy with hit-and-run tactics, not unlike the White Scars. However, their true purpose is to hunt the Fallen, a truth known only to the Black Knights of their company. Currently, the captain of the Raven Wing is Samael, the owner of the last known Astartes jet bike, believe it or not. Because the Dark Angels were the first legion and helped to field test and establish many of the doctrines and tactics employed by the other legions, the Dark Angels are more versatile and adaptable than most other legions. A Raven Guard will be a master of stealth, but may not be as adept at other forms of combat. In the same way, a Space Wolf will excel at in close combat but will struggle in stealth. Dark Angels can perform adeptly in almost any form of combat. They are more akin to a multi-purpose tool than they are a single-purpose weapon. This means that the Dark Angels can engage with almost any enemy in any environment under any circumstances. Different companies within the Dark Angels help to perform certain specialized tasks when necessary, and it is not uncommon for the Dark Angels to deploy strike forces composed of different elements from different companies. For a full and adaptable attack force made up of Deathwing Terminators, Raven Wing Riders, Standard Forces, and a few 10th Company Scouts. The Deathwing, for example, as the first company, made up entirely of Terminator-class warriors, are made more complete for total destruction, and the second company, known as the Raven Wing, are as fast and effective on jet bike as any White Scar and attack with hit-and-run maneuverability, also acting as scouts and recon forces. Integrate any Raven Wing or Deathwing into your company for a battle, and you will find the adaptability of the Dark Angels to be unquestionable. Furthermore, thanks to their past role as the Emperor's exterminators, the Dark Angels were pivotal to secret weapons and devices that were designed to wage war against the most powerful and most dangerous enemies of man. In fact, it is said that they rivaled even the Custodians themselves in terms of overall weapon arsenals. While most of these weapons are now lost to all except the most knowledgeable and high-ranking, their existence still remains. And further, the Dark Angels boast a large number of power weapons and ancient plasma-based firearms. In fact, it was believed that the Dark Angels were the Emperor's chosen legion to engage Mars itself if the Mechanicus ever turned traitor, which is a very large task given the technology Mars has accumulated. Further, it is a closely guarded secret that the Dark Angels may still possess weapons of old night, weapons of mass destruction meant to erase worlds from existence. It was these same weapons that Lion used to destroy the traitor homeworlds during the Horus Heresy. Finally, perhaps the greatest gift of the Dark Angels is that they are unwaveringly loyal. There is a running joke that the Dark Angels aren't truly loyal, not only because of the Fallen, but also because of their cold tactics and aloof personality. But the truth is that the Dark Angels are unquestionably loyal, as loyalty was a paramount virtue of Lionel Johnson, their Primarch. Most Dark Angels would sooner die than betray the Imperium or their oaths. As the First Legion and being sons of the most powerful Primarch, the Dark Angels carry with them a very powerful arrogance. They believe themselves superior to almost every other chapter. And while this trait isn't only applicable to the Dark Angels, almost every chapter believes themselves superior in some regard, for the Dark Angels it is a large source of their own personal downfall from grace. Which of course leads to the second and most obvious flaw, the Fallen. Without a doubt, the greatest weakness and clear shame of the Dark Angels is in the Fallen. It is their legacy. To the Dark Angels, the Fallen represent their greatest failure and weakness. Not only does their existence prove that the Legion is not without fault, but they recognize that if others were to know of the Fallen, it would prove to the Imperium that they are not above corruption, which brings shame to themselves, to the Lion, and to the Emperor by extension. And to that end, they seek redemption and salvation through the only means they deem right: complete extermination. The Dark Angel will go to any lengths to not only hunt the Fallen, but also to remove any knowledge of them from the galaxy. They have gone so far as to kill Imperium citizens, fellow Space Marines, and even a Custodes, all to hide knowledge of the Fallen. When the newly returned Primarch Robute Guilliman came to the Rock to deliver Primaris gene seed to the Dark Angels and to invite them on his Indominus crusade, Azrael feared Guilliman knew about the Fallen and even deliberated opening fire on Guilliman's fleet out of a desperate need to protect the truth. In the end, he did not, and it seemed Guilliman either didn't know about the Fallen or he just didn't care. There have also been engagements where the Dark Angels will abandon battlefields or wars specifically because they received information on a Fallen and will dedicate their forces to finding and capturing them. This paranoia and fear of their past being uncovered has led to the Dark Angels performing reprehensible deeds, all for the sake of hiding their shame. They trust few outsiders. Indeed, they struggle to trust their own brothers at times, as only the inner circle of the Dark Angels' command structure know about the Fallen, with outsiders only being aware that they are secrets they have no access to. The Dark Angels are secrets built upon secrets. As was said by one Dark Angel, the Alpha Legion like to believe themselves the masters of secrecy, but the Dark Angels have secrets that would have culled them. Now, while this means that the Dark Angels are harder to break and understand, it also means they are hard to appreciate, making one of the more distant and even feared chapters. So now that I've gone over the entire history and outline of the Dark Angels, at this point in the video, I will now give my personal opinion. The Dark Angels will always be my favorite of the legions. In my personal opinion, there is no better legion. From the beginning as the First Legion, even before the arrival of their Primarch, the First Legion was the envy of all the others, who looked on them with admiration and awe. While they did fall from grace for a time, with the Lion's arrival, they reminded the galaxy why they were the first. So great was their ability that Horus took great lengths to ensure Lion and his legion did not arrive on Terra. But like many who stood above others, their greatest weakness is not some cheap MacGuffin, but instead the sin of pride and hubris. It is the pride of the first that caused their downfall, and it is their shame that leads them to repent and continuously try to fix their past wrongs. I do not like the Dark Angels only because of their battle strength, which is among the finest of the legions, but also because of what they represent. On the one hand, they are the slayers of monsters, hunting and exterminating the worst threats to humanity and expunging them from memory itself, and all to no fanfare or thanks, largely going unknown and unrepresented in the archives of the Imperium for their deeds. In fact, Lion was worried at one point that he would offer nothing to the Imperium because all he left was devastation in his wake. But on the other hand, they are a legion that seeks redemption, and for 10,000 years have gone about it in dark, questionable, secretive, and disastrous ways. While it may be easy to write them off as paranoid fanatics who will willingly sacrifice 1,000 souls just to capture one Fallen, this also sets the stage for moments of absolute nobility. When Captain Lazarus spared a few moments for a dying mortal girl who gave her life to save his, offering her comfort and kindness. When Raphael, the apothecary of the Fifth Company, saved the life of a baby by performing an emergency C-section on a dying woman. When Brother Chaplain Boreas when he willingly allowed himself to be sacrificed and allowed a member of the Fallen to escape so that a plague virus wouldn't be unleashed across a world, or when Azrael willingly worked beside the fallen angel Cypher to prevent an atrocity in history from dooming the galaxy. These are all moments of nobility in a chapter that seems to have forgotten it. There can be no doubt that the Dark Angels are a secretive, reclusive, and morally questionable group. Their actions can range from noble to destructive, but I believe this is in itself their greatest draw. They perfectly exemplify what it is to live in a setting like Warhammer 40,000, where fear, confusion, and shame mingle with the desire for nobility, survival, and purpose. There are moments of great atrocity, but also moments of outstanding moral fortitude and valor. And now, with the return of Lionel Johnson and his attempt to reconsolidate Imperium Nihilus while also redeeming the fallen Dark Angels, perhaps the Dark Angels and their Primarch can finally receive the redemption and salvation they have all yearned for, ending 10,000 years of bitterness, shame, and isolation. And in this way, perhaps, the princes might take up their fallen crowns at last and return to the Imperium as the true and undisputed Angels of Death.